All right, so today we have a little bit of an unusual format. Our speaker is invited for 6 o'clock. So before 6 o'clock, I will basically go over discussion questions for module 8. And so next week we won't have like a Zoom class or in-person class. I emailed you just before class. Essentially, next week you get off. I expect you to review the videos for module 8. I will kind of essentially go through the big points through these discussion questions, but do go over these videos, especially for those of you that are possibly contemplating working in the area of valuation experts or economic damages or forensic economics. Might be helpful. I realize that probably most of you won't do it, but so that's why I'm not emphasizing this too much. So it's kind of a quasi-optional module, if you will, for the matter. But to the extent that what I'm going to talk about here, that's important, right? So kind of cliff notes on this. And then at 6 o'clock, Jules Bricker, who is a lawyer here in Baltimore, here in Maryland, and he's actually an alum of our law school. He'll talk about, divorce law a little bit and, how he works with valuation experts in the context of divorce. And Tiffany, you didn't get to present your critique of the valuation report. Do you want to do it? You don't have to, because I already pretty much created it.
No, I'm not shadow presenting it. I'm good without presenting. I sent it in to you and I saw that you graded it.
Yeah, that's fine. Let's just keep that.
Okay.
Let's see, somebody else joined us. Did Jules join us? Charlie joined us, okay. All right. All right, so since Jules will be here soon, let me go over the discussion questions. So basically, module 8 has to do with economic damages calculation. Now, how is economic damages calculations different or related to business valuation? It's essentially application of business valuation in a very different context. I mean, there is an overlap, but the same principles apply. So you can have first of all, what is damages? Damage is a situation where one party somehow injures another, right? So either your competitor steals your business, or you're wrongfully terminated, or by a car and you're permanently injured and you can no longer do your work. You've been damaged, you've been injured, right? You are entitled, in that case, you are entitled to typically some sort of economic compensation. And you want to estimate that compensation, right? So how is this related to valuation? Well, very broadly speaking, whatever it is, whether it's a damaged business that was damaged or whether it was you who were damaged as an individual, you had a value before an injury and there's a value that's diminished after the injury. You need to estimate the difference in those values, and that's what if the court decides, okay, you were legitimately injured here, we're going to compensate you for that, right? So it is the bread and butter of valuation analysts. Most valuation analysts talk about, deal with both, right? They don't just value businesses, typically their practices deal with valuations, kind of in the context we've discussed so far, but also in the context of pure, damages, right? And it's oftentimes damages calculations are much quicker, and so something like I, for example, had to do a damage calculation of somebody who was claiming physical, injuries as a result of, they went to a horse, they went to took a horse riding training class, right? And they fell off the horse, right? And they claimed that they were injured as a result of negligence from a horse training place, right? So, and how do you typically calculate that loss of value, if you will? Well, you see, okay, what this person was making until that point. As a result of an injury, is there sort of a permanent or semi-permanent or persistent decline in their earnings? and you present value that difference essentially, and that's your damages, right? It's sort of basically almost exactly identical to doing discounted cash flow calculation, right? So very similar. No, we don't do market approach here, but it's basically the same as discounted cash flow. Or another example, where it's more of a business damages, where the case I did is, I should say, employee leaves and starts a competing business, and your business in the same area, and your business shows persistent decline in value because now everybody goes to your competitor, right? And essentially, this is an example of loss of theft with trade secret. You've been heavily damaged here, and so you're suing your past employee for essentially trade secret theft or whatever, and you need to calculate what is the value of those damages. Well, what would have been the value of your business had this not occurred, had the employee not left and not stolen, versus what it is now, right? And that's two different present value calculations, and that gives you essentially the damages, right, or the loss, the value of the loss. Okay, so. And so you can distinguish, and so there's 3 videos there on Module 8. One is sort of my video for about close to 40 minutes long, where I go through Trugman, right, more theoretical discussion of those damages and what are the different elements. The second one is actually, we had Rob Carter, who is also an alum of ours, who is a valuation expert, a very successful one. He works for a company called Valid Advisors. Valid stands for Valuation Litigation. Before that, he was with BDO Sidman. Before that, BDO Sidman, he was I believe. So he, is a very successful valuation forensics person. And he's given a great talk. I've listened to it again today, a year, something like 8 months later, and I learned a lot from that just by reviewing that again. And he talks about various types of valuations and expert witnessing, damages cases, and so on, how you approach them. And the third one that I found that I posted today, actually as a talk by another valuation expert in California, where she actually is lecturing to attorneys how this damage calculations are done. Right? So this is more technical. So if you ever do like a personal damages case, this is or calculation that charges a very easily kind of very well laid out video. Or for lawyers typically their quantity of skills are very limited, and so she lays out very nicely how so the lawyers understand, for lawyers to understand what their expert witnesses do in this kinds of cases. Right. So after this class next week, whenever, please review those videos. They're very informative, and it will help you understand it a little bit more deeply. All right, so you can distinguish between what's called loss-profit analysis this is for business damages. Loss-profit analysis versus loss of value analysis. So lost profits versus loss of value. This is in my video, so this is the point I make there. Right, so suppose, in the case that I described to you, suppose you have possible situation. In my case, it was truly loss of value because he argued damage of value. But suppose somebody did something bad and the business suffers sort of not a permanent necessarily decline in profits, but so say for a year, profits decline, right? And then after a year, they're able to do other things to kind of recover from it, and then things come back to normal, right? So the question becomes, how do you compensate this injury, for this injury? Well, this is not a permanent decline in value. Yes, they may, but they're entitled to some compensation, right? So in this case, it's a more limited time, it's a time frame type of a thing. It makes no sense to do a permanent loss of value calculation, right? Because things have recovered over time. So you basically calculate, well, what was in that limited time period, a year, 2 years, the loss, what were the profits, potential profits that were lost, right? So that's loss of profits. A loss of value, as I already said, is more of a permanent situation, right? Like I told you, but basically in the case I was looking at, after this employee went and started competitive business, the original business, it was nothing to recover. And so here you need to calculate, well, what, if this person didn't steal this trade secret, what would have been the loss of value? Now, what would the business be worth? Now it's worth nothing. So here's your estimation of the loss, permanent loss. As you probably can imagine, loss of value subsumes loss of profits, right? You have to have loss of profits to have a loss of value, right? Now, a very important point that you have to make is that if you do loss of value calculation, you cannot then go ahead and add up to the loss of profits calculation, right? That would be double counting the same thing, right? So because loss of value already implies loss of profits. And as Rob Carter, for example, points out in his presentation, some economists make this mistake. You do one or the other. Okay, so that's the important element. All right. So mitigation of damages. So another important point that you have these damages, but so you can't just assume that anytime you have damages, you are entitled to compensation, right? You have a reasonable responsibility when you are damaged to try to mitigate these damages yourself, right? So for example, if you were fired, you can't just not work, right? And if you're capable of working, you have to try to look for a job. So if you fail to do that, then you may not get any damage. They'll say, well, you chose to, this is not, right? It's a different situation, like if your business is permanently destroyed, but in the case of, let's say, I think it's most clearly visible in cases of discrimination. The person says, well, my employer fired me and I'm entitled to compensation for being fired. Well, there's a job down the street you could have taken and you didn't take it. Why didn't you do that? You could have yourself mitigated your own losses. You're just being lazy. You're just like, you don't want to, your retirement, right? They may be here. So you could have compensated your own losses and you didn't. That's a whole different story if somebody, I don't know, suffers a permanent injury as a result of, right, where they're permanently crippled as a result of whatever, workman's compensation, something like that. Here, you can do, right? You had an arm, you have no arm anymore, right? So you lost your ability. So that's another thing that kind of is taken into account in this sort of situation. I explained to you between the lost profits and loss of business value. Now, the lost profit analysis, again, it's this as-if analysis. All of those cases have as-if analysis. You start by saying, there was an event, right? We have information of what happened before the event. When we try to calculate either lost profits, loss of value, we need to project what happened, like essentially with the company in reality as a result of that, versus what could have happened had it not occurred, right? So it's just kind of a, and that's what your lost profit analysis is. It might comes up in this is the date at which you calculate your lost compensation, right? Should it be the date of the event or where like wrongdoing has occurred, or the date of trial, let's say, right? You're in court, right? So when should we calculate that loss, right? And the answer to that is it depends. It depends on why are you doing this calculation, right? And also it depends also on statutory law in a particular state you're trying to do the valuation at. So if, let's say, a question you're trying to answer, well, we want to find, or, let's say you're working for statute government, some sort that wants to figure out, okay, how much should we penalize the certain conduct, bad conduct? And you are saying, okay, well, for that purpose, I need to figure out what should be the value of the penalty versus as compared as a proportion of the value of the firm. Well, in this case, it's really at the time of what matters, the value of the firm is at the time of the penalty, right? Not at the time of the misconduct, right? So then it's trial date. As opposed to what I discovered earlier, a situation where as if analysis, or you want to compensate, what would the company be worth had the theft of the trade secret, right? When, because that's what when you should be evaluated. But here you have to talk to your lawyers and find out. All right. The key element also, obviously, if you're doing evaluation as of the trial date, what is the biggest advantage? Well, you have all the information available to you about the company as of the trial date, which is obviously later. If any additional information had come out that could help you in your evaluation, you can use it. But the disadvantage is what? The disadvantage is that the further away you are from the event of the actual injury, the more likely it is that intervening events could have occurred, right? That really kind of make things less clear. What is the key element of being able to claim damages for destruction of a startup business? Well, so one of the let's say you have a new restaurant you opened up, right? And 3 months after you have opened up the restaurant burned down as a result of negligence of someone, right? Well, the question comes up as what are you entitled to? Well, the restaurant at the time was losing money, right? Maybe the restaurant's worthless at the time. So the question becomes, well, it's not. Well, yes, fine. It maybe not been worth much at the time. They have been worth it. Well, the answer to that might be, wait a minute. But most restaurants die anyway, right? After most restaurants don't survive 1 year, right? So maybe you're not entitled to any damages. Maybe maybe this fire saved you the misery of being in this business. So that kind of illustrates the you need to prove it. You need to prove somehow. You need to argue. Wait a minute. No, but my restaurant, I had a super cool chef. It would have survived, and this is why, right? So you need to basically argue what is the probability of that? Yes, this business at the time of the loss, it's a startup company. Maybe it's a new, I don't know, it's a new biotech firm, and the biotech firms lose money for 10, 15 years. But look, it was working on this miracle drug, and it would have cured cancer, and I would have Moderna. I don't know what you need to be able to prove, right? So this kind of probability essentially actually become worth something, and that's what comes back here. We already talked about kind of the distinction between business damages and personal economic damages. So business damages is loss of value calculations when companies lose value, right? Or businesses lose value. Personal damages are things like loss of wages. Typically, that's what would be the loss of wages, injury, whether it's a car accident or it's a horseback riding accident. You can't work for a number of years, a long period of time. God forbid you're personally crippled. You need to be compensated for it, right? Or another example of economic damages, personal economic damages, is wrongful termination, right? You fired from your job wrongfully. Maybe in the process your reputation is damaged. Let's say you were fired because of for illegal reasons, such as, for example, because of your skin color, or your religion, or something like that, or your gender, right? You were discriminated against, or you're fired because you're a whistleblower, which is also illegal, right? And then the employer, to boot, goes around and badmouths you to other employers, so you can't get a job, right? So then get another job. You try to get another job. Your reputation is harmed, and you're seeking compensation for it. personal damages part, right? So, but the bottom line is, all of those cases have the same thing in common. There is an event, and if it didn't happen, you would have made over time $1 million, but you end up making over time only $100,000, and you need to present value the difference essentially, and that's the that is the value of your loss. All right, so very briefly, we have 10 minutes. I want to just kind of draw on the board so to illustrate this a little bit better. Let's see. Make sure guest speaker's not here. So very briefly, so again, the way, so let's say this is the timeline, right? Right, and there's an event that happens, event causing an injury, right? Whether it's an injury to the firm or whether it's an injury to an individual. So let's suppose up to this event, your earnings, whether it's personal earnings, whether it's business earnings, they did something like this. They were growing over time, right? Nicer. They were growing over time, right? And then after the event, they go down and they settle at some sort of a permanent little lower level, right? Clearly, there is an injury here, right? So what in the damages cases, what you really need to do is you need to say, okay, we know that this is what happened. Reality. What I need to do, well, is imagine what would my earnings be had this not happened. So I need to sit down and project. Maybe it would be something like that over time, right? And here we have right cash flow 1, cash flow 2, whatever, right? And I want to present value what would over time, and I'm going to cost cash flow 1 prime, cash flow 2 prime, cash flow 3 prime. I want to present value over time this value of this hypothetical cash flows, right? That I would have gotten had there been no injury or damages versus what I've actually gotten, right? Well, truth is we don't know this typically we only have information on what have actually happened, let's say after here, right? Because this is the date of trial, right? So I need to still project even, the current state, right? So, but and so there are various methodologies for doing that, but that's essentially the present value of this difference is the value of the loss of damages. Okay. Now, you calculate the value of these damages. What will happen is you give this to your attorneys and they report, and then they goes to court. They argue it either might settle on a certain compensation, or maybe it will go to trial. The jury will award on the basis of your calculation of what those damages are like. Right, so that's kind of how it's done. One of those interesting things that comes up here, it's a present value exercise. And the third video, if you're interested in this, right, kind of like more deeply, I would suggest listening to this, watching this third video of this presentation to lawyers, because the economist really goes through very nice how to project this earnings, and she talks about wage losses and so on, like in the result of, say, personal injuries. But what discount rate should you use here? The question that comes up, the discount rate that you should use. Jules, are you there? Jules joined it. Okay. All right. So our speaker's here. Let me just wrap this up real quick. The discount rate you should use here is the rate of return that the person injured or the company injured would you that investors compensatory damages, right? That award. For most people, in case of personal damages, that would be treasury bill, the treasury bond rate. Anyway, our speaker is here, so I want to introduce you guys. Josie, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Okay, great. So Jules Bricker is here. He is my friend. He is my friend. He's our daughters in school together, and he's very kind to agree to talk to us about